Aktion Bernhard. You're holding a 20-pound note in 1944 London. The paper feels right. The watermark catches the light perfectly. The serial numbers follow the proper sequence. Every security feature passes inspection. You hand it to the shopkeeper. He examines it briefly, accepts it without question. What you don't know is that this note was printed by Jewish prisoners in a concentration camp. What the shopkeeper doesn't know is that he's just accepted currency so perfect it could destroy the British economy. The counterfeiting operation known as Aktion Bernhard ran from 1942 to 1945 in Block 18 and Block 19 of Sachsenhausen concentration camp. SS Oberfuhrer Bernhard Kruger conceived the program as economic warfare against Britain, recruiting Jewish prisoners with backgrounds in printing, engraving, and banking. The operation's existence remained classified within Nazi leadership circles, known only to Heinrich Himmler, a handful of SS officers, and the prisoners who risked their lives to make it work. Major Bernhard Kruger, the program's namesake, selected 142 Jewish prisoners for their specialized skills. Salomon Smolyanov, a Russian counterfeiter serving a prison sentence in Berlin, became the operation's technical director. Adolf Berger, a Slovakian printer, documented the program's inner workings in his 1966 memoir, The Devil's Workshop. These men, along with master engraver Abraham Jacobson and banknote specialist Moritz Nockstern, created what British intelligence later called the most sophisticated counterfeiting operation in history. The prisoners reverse-engineered every aspect of British currency production. They analyzed paper composition, recreated specialized inks, and replicated watermarks with precision that fooled Bank of England experts. The operation produced over 134 million pounds worth of British notes, equivalent to approximately 6 billion pounds in today's currency. Quality control was so rigorous that Bank of England officials examining captured notes after the war initially refused to believe they were counterfeit. Here's what makes this impossible to reconcile with our understanding of Nazi administrative structure. The operation consumed massive resources, specialized equipment, rare materials, skilled labor, yet appeared in no official Reich ministry budgets. Transport records show regular deliveries of high-grade paper and inks to Sachsenhausen, but requisition orders bore no departmental signatures. The Reichsbank, responsible for Germany's monetary policy, maintained no documentation of Aktion Bernhard, despite the program's potential to destabilize Allied currencies. The mainstream explanation is that Aktion Bernhard operated as a black project under direct SS control, bypassing normal administrative channels to maintain operational security. Heinrich Himmler personally authorized the program and restricted knowledge to essential personnel only. This compartmentalization, standard in sensitive military operations, explains why the program left minimal paper trails and remained unknown to most Nazi leadership until captured documents revealed its existence after the war. But the scale contradicts this explanation. Moving 142 specialized prisoners, establishing sophisticated printing facilities, and maintaining consistent supply chains required coordination across multiple Reich departments. The Reichsführing SS controlled concentration camp administration, but printing equipment came from civilian contractors. Paper and ink supplies originated from the Reich Ministry of Economics. Transportation required Wehrmacht cooperation, yet no evidence exists of these departments knowing about Aktion Bernhard's true purpose. Documents recovered from Sachsenhausen in 1945 show the operation expanded beyond British currency to include American dollars and potentially Swiss francs. This escalation would have required approval from the highest levels of Nazi leadership. Yet neither Hitler's daily briefings nor Goebbels' extensive diaries mention economic warfare through counterfeiting. The program's budget, estimated at over 12 million Reichsmarks, appears nowhere in SS financial records examined by Allied investigators. Some researchers suggest Aktion Bernhard operated as a parallel program, answering directly to Himmler's personal office, bypassing all normal chains of command. This would explain the administrative invisibility while accounting for the massive resource allocation. Others propose the program received funding through captured assets from occupied territories, creating a shadow economy within the SS structure. Who authorized moving precious wartime resources to a counterfeiting operation that most Nazi leadership didn't know existed? How did 142 prisoners maintain such perfect operational security for 3 years? What other programs operated in this administrative shadow zone between official policy and classified reality? Why did the Bank of England not detect the influx of perfect counterfeit currency until after the war? The prisoners of Aktion Bernhard survived because their skills made them invaluable, but their expertise in creating financial chaos would prove useful for other classified programs operating in Nazi Germany's hidden bureaucracy. Commando Benes. You hear the pendulum scraping against paper in the bunker silence. It's March 1945, somewhere beneath the Harz Mountains. The SS Oberfuhrer watching over your shoulder breathes through his mouth. His uniform reeks of stale cigarettes and something else, fear, maybe, or desperation. The brass pendulum swings in lazy circles above the Wehrmacht tactical map. You're supposed to be finding Allied positions, finding them with a piece of metal on a string. This is Commando Benes, the Reich's last gamble on forces beyond the physical world. The unit was officially designated as Forschungs-Gruppe für außergewöhnliche Phänomene Research Group for Extraordinary Phenomena, but everyone called it Commando Benes after its commanding officer, SS Sturmbannführer Klaus Benes, a former anthropologist from Vienna University who published papers on Alpine folklore before the war consumed everything. Wehrmacht records discovered in 1947 by Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison of the British Intelligence Corps show the unit received direct funding through honorary channels, bypassing normal military procurement entirely. Morrison's classified report, declassified only in 1993, documented expenditures of over 4 million Reichsmarks between January 1944 and April 1945. The money went toward recruiting what Benes called sensitive personnel. Dowsers pulled from rural Austria and Bavaria, a handful of self-proclaimed psychics from occupied territories, 3 Czech mystics who claimed they could influence enemy radio communications through concentration alone. The unit established its primary research facility in a converted salt mine near Nordhausen, complete with soundproof chambers and what survivor testimonies describe as meditation cells carved directly into the rock face. Here's what makes Commando Benes impossible to categorize within normal Wehrmacht doctrine. The unit operated entirely outside standard military hierarchy. No divisional commander knew of its existence. No general staff officer had authorization to deploy its personnel, according to captured documents analyzed by Dr. Margaret Steinberg of Cambridge University in her 1998 study, Occult Warfare in the Third Reich. Benes reported directly to Heinrich Himmler through a chain of command that included only 3 intermediaries. The unit's mission parameters, written in Benes's own hand, included development of psychic reconnaissance capabilities, investigation of dowsing applications for submarine detection, and weaponization of metaphysical energies against enemy morale. The mainstream historical explanation treats Commando Benes as another example of late-war Nazi desperation. Historians like Richard J. Evans argue that as conventional military options dwindled, the Reich increasingly turned to pseudoscientific programs that offered false hope of miracle weapons. The unit represents the ideological extremism of the SS, combined with Germany's deteriorating strategic position in 1944 and 45. But the documentation suggests something more systematic than desperate improvisation. Financial records show consistent monthly payments dating back to January 1944, when Germany still held significant territorial advantages. Personnel files indicate recruitment began even earlier, in late 1943. The unit's experimental protocols, preserved in fragmentary form at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, demonstrate sophisticated methodology, control groups, statistical analysis, detailed documentation of success and failure rates across different psychic phenomena. This wasn't occult theater for morale purposes. Someone believed it might actually work. Perhaps most troubling, several former Allied intelligence officers reported unexplained communication disruptions in sectors where Commando Benes operated. Captain Robert Hayes of the Office of Strategic Services documented radio interference patterns near the Harz Mountains that didn't match known German jamming technology. His classified 1945 report describes periods of complete signal degradation, lasting up to 6 hours with no identifiable electronic cause. Similar reports emerged from Soviet intelligence files opened in 1991. The unit disbanded in April 1945 as Allied forces closed on the Nordhausen facility. Most personnel records were destroyed, though Morrison's team recovered partial files on 27 individuals. Klaus Benes himself disappeared during the final weeks of the war. Some sources place him in American custody. Others suggest he reached Argentina through rat lines. His ultimate fate remains unknown. What kind of results did Commando Benes actually achieve? Why would rational military planners fund psychic experiments during total war? If the unit was purely fraudulent, why did Allied intelligence officers document unexplained phenomena in areas of its operation? What happened to the research data that wasn't destroyed? And what does it mean that even in 1945, with Berlin burning, someone thought supernatural warfare was worth 4 million Reichsmarks? But Commando Benes wasn't the Reich's only underground gamble on impossible technology. Project Riese. You are crouched in Tunnel 7, 300 feet beneath the Owl Mountains of Lower Silesia. The air tastes of concrete dust and diesel exhaust. Your lamp beam cuts through darkness that has swallowed 60,000 lives. The tunnel stretches beyond your light, carved from solid rock with a precision that defies wartime desperation. You run your hand along the wall. The concrete is smooth as glass, perfect, engineered for something that was never installed. Above your head, steel reinforcement bars jut from the ceiling like the ribs of some massive creature that died before completion. The silence is absolute. No documentation survived to explain what was supposed to fill this void. The discovery came in 1945, when Soviet forces overran the Wałbrzych region and found something that wasn't supposed to exist. 7 separate construction sites spread across 25 square miles of mountainous terrain. Each site connected by tunnels that formed a subterranean network larger than any military installation the Allies had encountered. The construction had begun in 1943 under the direction of Organization Ta. But the project designation Riese appeared in no surviving Nazi planning documents. Dr. Tomasz Quisz of the University of Wrocław spent 15 years cataloging what remained after the war. His 2007 publication, The Underground Reich, documented tunnel systems with a combined length of over 13 miles, reinforced concrete walls 4 feet thick, chambers carved to dimensions that suggested industrial machinery of unprecedented scale. Here's what makes this impossible. 60,000 slave laborers worked on Project Riese between 1943 and 1945. The logistics alone should have generated thousands of pages of documentation, transportation schedules, material requisitions, architectural plans, personnel assignments. The Nazi bureaucracy documented everything with obsessive precision, yet not a single blueprint survives, not one construction order, not even a memo explaining the project's purpose. The prisoners who built it were systematically murdered as the war ended. The engineers who designed it vanished. The SS officers who supervised it left no records. The scale defies rational explanation, Doctor. Klaus Goldmann's 1998 analysis for the German Archaeological Institute calculated that Project Riese required the excavation of over 2 million cubic yards of rock and earth. The concrete used exceeded the amount needed to build the entire Atlantic Wall. This was the largest construction project in Nazi-occupied Europe outside the concentration camp system itself. The electrical infrastructure alone could have powered a city of 50,000 people. Yet it was built in secret, in a remote mountain range, with no obvious strategic value. The mainstream explanation is that Project Riese was intended as an underground factory complex for V-weapon production, similar to the Mittelbau Dora facility at Nordhausen. The tunnels were designed to house rocket assembly lines safe from Allied bombing. Construction was abandoned when Germany's military situation became hopeless in late 1944. But the engineering specifications contradict this theory. The chambers are too large for rocket assembly. The tunnel configuration is wrong for manufacturing workflows. The electrical capacity exceeds anything needed for weapons production by a factor of 10. Most critically, the locations make no strategic sense. Lower Silesia was 600 miles from the V-rocket testing ranges at Peenemünde. Moving completed weapons from underground factories in the Alp Mountains to launch sites would have required transportation networks that didn't exist. Some researchers suggest Project Riese was intended for something far more ambitious than conventional weapons manufacturing. The construction timeline raises additional questions. Work began in 1943, when Germany was already losing the war. Resources were desperately needed for existing weapons programs. Yet enormous quantities of steel, concrete, and skilled labor were diverted to this mysterious mountain project. The prisoner mortality rate exceeded 90%. This wasn't industrial construction. This was something else entirely. Polish archaeologist Dr. Andrzej Kola's ground-penetrating radar surveys in 2012 revealed additional chambers that remain unsealed. His data suggests the tunnel network extends far deeper than previously documented. Some chambers appear to be intact, their contents unknown. The Lower Silesian government has sealed access to these deeper sections indefinitely. What kind of facility required chambers 30 feet high and 200 feet long? Why were the electrical systems designed for power loads that exceeded any known industrial process? What happened to the engineers and scientists who designed Project Riese? Why did the SS execute the slave laborers instead of simply abandoning the site? What lies in the sealed chambers that government surveys have identified but refused to open? But Project Riese was not Nazi Germany's only program to erase its own participants from history. Sonderkommando Elbe. The morning air over Brandenburg tastes of aviation fuel and desperation. You're 20 years old, standing beside a Messerschmitt 109, stripped of everything but its engine and a single machine gun. April 14th, 1945. The Reich is collapsing around you. Berlin burns 50 miles east. American bombers drone overhead in formations so vast they blot out the sun. Your squadron leader's voice cuts through the engine noise. Today, we become the aircraft. You're about to climb into a machine designed not to bring you home, but to take an enemy bomber with you when you die. What you don't know is that Adolf Hitler has never heard of your mission. Sonderkommando Elbe emerged from the fractured command structure of Nazi Germany's final weeks. Documented in post-war Allied intelligence reports and the testimony of surviving Luftwaffe personnel. Major Heinrich Lang, a veteran fighter pilot, conceived the operation in March 1945 without consulting Berlin. Working with Colonel Otto Kohnke of Fighter Wing 7, Lang recruited volunteers from among teenage pilots who had received less than 30 hours of flight training. The unit's existence was confirmed through interrogation records filed by Captain James Morrison of the United States Army Air Force's Intelligence Service in his 1946 report, Irregular Operations of the Declining Luftwaffe. The aircraft themselves were Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190 as modified by ground crews at Stendal and Gardellingen airfields. Armament was reduced to a single machine gun with 60 rounds. Armor plating was removed, extra fuel tanks were installed. Flight Sergeant Wilhelm Krinius, who survived the war, described the modifications in his 1962 interview with historian David Irving. We made them as light as possible. Every gram mattered. The idea was to climb fast, get above the bombers, then dive straight down into them. On April 7th, 1945, Langen's volunteers received their final briefing. The mission was simple. Ram American B-17 and B-24 bombers during daylight raids over central Germany. Pilots were instructed to aim for the bomber's wing root or cockpit area. Parachutes were provided, though the physics made survival unlikely. Training consisted of a single practice flight. No one informed Luftwaffe High Command in Berlin. No authorization came from Hitler's bunker. The operation launched on April 7th, with 183 volunteers from 10 different airfields. Allied combat reports, compiled by the 8th Air Force Historical Office, record encounters with German fighters exhibiting unprecedented aggressive behavior and apparent disregard for pilot survival. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen of the 444th Bomb Group witnessed a German fighter come straight down through our formation without firing. hitting Lieutenant Morrison's fort in the wing. Both aircraft exploded immediately. The mainstream explanation treats Sonderkommando Elbe as evidence of Nazi Germany's descent into fanatical desperation during the war's final phase. Military historians like Richard Overy argue that the operation represents the logical extreme of a totalitarian state's willingness to sacrifice its own personnel for diminishing strategic returns. The suicide tactics, they suggest, emerge naturally from Nazi ideology's emphasis on death before defeat. But the command structure tells a different story. Major Long organized the entire operation without orders from above. Regional commanders provided aircraft and pilots based solely on Long's personal authority. The mission proceeded despite the complete absence of strategic coordination with other Luftwaffe operations that day. Captain Morrison's intelligence files reveal that Hitler learned of Sonderkommando Elbe only after its execution through routine casualty reports filed 3 days later. Even more puzzling, several volunteer pilots reported receiving conflicting briefings about the mission's purpose. Some believed they were participating in a standard interception operation, with orders to ram only as a last resort. Others understood the ramming to be the primary objective. Flight Sergeant Hans Dortenmann, interviewed by Allied interrogators in May 1945, claimed his squadron leader never mentioned suicide tactics at all. "We thought we were going up to fight normally. The ramming instruction came over the radio during the mission itself." Of the 183 pilots who launched that morning, only 15 returned to base. Allied losses totaled 7 bombers destroyed and 19 damaged. The operation achieved tactical surprise but no strategic impact. American daylight bombing continued without interruption. How does a military operation involving nearly 200 aircraft proceed without authorization from the chain of command? Why did regional commanders provide resources for a mission their supreme leader never approved? What instructions were actually given to pilots who reported conflicting briefings about their own survival? If the Nazi state truly controlled every aspect of military planning, how could such a massive operation remain invisible until after its execution? Why would experienced commanders risk court-martial for a tactically meaningless gesture? The fractured Reich harbored other programs that existed in the shadows between official policy and local initiative. Operation Zeppelin. The radio crackles to life in the cramped Moscow apartment. It's 3:15 in the morning on September 12th, 1943. You're hunched over the transmitter, fingers trembling as you tap out the coded message. Outside, snow falls silently on the empty streets. The signal travels west through occupied territory, past German checkpoints, all the way to a nondescript building in Berlin where men in civilian clothes track your every word. But here's what should terrify you most. The message isn't going to the SS. It isn't going to the Gestapo. It isn't even going to Wehrmacht intelligence. The men receiving your transmission don't officially exist in any Nazi organizational chart. They answer to no one Hitler has ever heard of. Operation Zeppelin emerged from the labyrinthine world of Abwehr counterintelligence, first documented in captured German files analyzed by historian David Kahn in his 1967 work, The Codebreakers. The program began in early 1942 under the direction of Colonel Heinz Danko. Hera, who operated with complete autonomy from both SS Oberfuhrer Walter Schellenberg's foreign intelligence apparatus and Reinhard Heydrich's Reich Security main office. Declassified Soviet NKVD archives, made available to researchers after 1991, reveal that between March 1942 and August 1944, at least 47 Russian prisoners of war were recruited, trained, and parachuted behind Soviet lines with a single objective: assassinate Joseph Stalin. The recruitment process took place at Wuhlheide camp outside Berlin, where Captain Nikolai Fedorov, a former Red Army officer captured at Smolensk, served as the primary talent scout. British intelligence historian Nigel West, in his 1998 analysis Unreliable Witnesses, documented how Fedorov identified candidates based on psychological profiles developed by Dr. Hermann Bickler, a specialist in what the Germans termed ideological conversion therapy. Each selected prisoner underwent 6 weeks of intensive training in parachute operations, weapons handling, urban surveillance, and most critically, how to penetrate Stalin's personal security apparatus. The training facility, located in a requisitioned hunting lodge near Brandenburg, operated under the covered designation Sonderstab R, with a budget allocation that appeared nowhere in official Abwehr accounting records. Here's what makes Operation Zeppelin historically unprecedented. It was conceived, funded, and executed entirely outside the knowledge of Heinrich Himmler, Hermann Göring, or any member of Hitler's inner circle. Former CIA analyst Mark Stout, writing in the journal Intelligence and National Security in 2004, noted that surviving Abwehr personnel files show Colonel Hera reporting directly to Admiral Wilhelm Canaris through a communication channel designated only as Sonderbereich Z. Even Canaris' deputy, Colonel Hans Oster, appears to have been excluded from operational briefings. This level of compartmentalization was virtually unknown within the Nazi hierarchy, where competing intelligence agencies routinely sabotaged each other's operations through bureaucratic maneuvering. The operational records, preserved in the Russian State Military Archive in Moscow, detailed 12 separate infiltration attempts. Agent Flamingo, real name Viktor Zykov, came within 800 meters of the Kremlin walls on November 4th, 1943, before being captured by NKVD border guards. Agent Tuscany, identified as Captain Boris Rudensky, successfully established a cover identity as a railway worker in Tula and operated undetected for 73 days before his radio transmissions were triangulated. The closest any agent came to the target was Agent Morocco, Lieutenant Pavel Tarasov, who obtained employment as a kitchen worker in the NKVD headquarters building and remained in position for 4 months before his handler lost contact in March 1944. The mainstream historical explanation treats Operation Zeppelin as another desperate late-war Nazi scheme, born from Admiral Canaris' increasing desperation as the military situation deteriorated. Standard accounts suggest the program reflected the Abwehr's attempt to maintain relevance against the growing power of SS intelligence services, essentially a bureaucratic gambit disguised as strategic operations. But the evidence contradicts this interpretation. The program began in early 1942, when German forces still held the military initiative. The level of resources committed, including the allocation of transport aircraft desperately needed elsewhere, suggests institutional backing far beyond what a declining intelligence service could muster. Most puzzling is the complete operational security. Not one reference to Zeppelin appears in the extensive Wannsee Conference transcripts, the Nuremberg trial documents, or even in Canaris' personal papers, seized after his arrest in 1944. Why would the Abwehr risk everything on a program its own leadership couldn't acknowledge? Who authorized an operation that bypassed every established chain of command? What made eliminating Stalin worth compromising the entire Nazi intelligence apparatus? How did 47 men simply vanish from official records while their mission continued for 2 years? Even as Operation Zeppelin collapsed in the chaos of 1944, other programs emerged from the shadows of the Nazi war machine, each more impossible than the last. Wunderwaffe, Project Kronos. You hear the hum before you see anything else. It's November 8th, 1944. You're descending concrete steps beneath a nondescript warehouse in Thüringen. The air tastes metallic. Your flashlight catches copper coils wrapped around what looks like a massive bell. The hum grows louder. The physicist beside you, captured from the University of Vienna just 6 months ago, whispers calculations in German. His hands shake as he adjusts dials on equipment that shouldn't exist. Not here, not now, not with the technology available in 1944. Dr. Heinrich Kessler discovered the Kronos files in 1978 while researching Operation Paperclip archives at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. Buried within routine administrative documents for rocket fuel procurement, Kessler found budget allocations for temporal research materials, totaling 4.7 million Reichsmarks between January 1944 and April 1945. The funds had been systematically diverted from Wernher von Braun's V-2 rocket program without his knowledge or authorization. Project leader Dr. Ernst Zimmermann, a theoretical physicist formerly of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, had assembled a team of 12 captured Allied scientists in an underground facility designated only as Standort Omega. The surviving documentation, published in Kessler's 1981 paper Unacknowledged Nazi Scientific Programs in the Journal of Modern European History, describes experiments with chronological displacement fields using modified electromagnetic resonance chambers. Technical schematics show apparatus capable of generating localized temporal distortions lasting up to 47 seconds. Test logs document successful displacement of small objects, steel ball bearings, laboratory mice, by intervals ranging from 3 to 18 minutes into the past. The precision of these displacements was reportedly accurate to within 0.03 seconds. The mainstream explanation is straightforward fraud and desperation. By late 1944, Nazi Germany was collapsing. Resources were scarce. Rational scientific programs were abandoned in favor of increasingly fantastical wonder weapons that promised impossible salvation. Project Kronos represents the final, desperate grasp of a regime willing to fund any claim of miraculous technology, no matter how absurd. The documentation itself likely represents elaborate fabrication designed to secure continued funding and laboratory protection for scientists trying to survive the war's final months. But the material evidence tells a different story. In 1993, construction crews renovating the Thuringen warehouse discovered the underground laboratory exactly as described in Zimmermann's files. The electromagnetic apparatus remained intact. Metallurgical analysis conducted by the Max Planck Institute confirmed the copper coils contained isotopic anomalies consistent with exposure to intense chronological fields, a phenomenon not understood by conventional physics until theoretical work in the 2000s. More puzzling, radiocarbon dating of organic materials found within the chamber showed temporal inconsistencies of up to 23 minutes. Wood samples appeared older than the concrete that surrounded them, despite being placed there during documented experiments. The financial records present their own mystery. The 4.7 million Reichsmarks diverted from von Braun's program should have crippled V2 production. Instead, rocket output actually increased during the same period, suggesting an unknown secondary funding source. Some researchers suggest the money came from liquidated assets of exterminated Jewish families, but no paper trail exists. Others propose the funding originated from captured Allied gold reserves, though no such reserves were ever reported missing. The accounting remains mathematically impossible. Most troubling are Zimmermann's final entries, dated April 13th, 1945, 4 days after the liberation of the surrounding area by Allied forces. He describes successful displacement of human subjects by periods exceeding 3 hours. The subjects returned reporting detailed knowledge of events that had not yet occurred, including specific details of German surrender negotiations that proved accurate when they took place weeks later. Zimmermann's handwriting becomes increasingly erratic in these final pages. His last entry consists of a single repeated phrase: "We have opened something that was meant to remain closed." How does a collapsing regime fund impossible technology? What explains isotopic anomalies that conventional physics cannot produce? Why do organic samples show temporal inconsistencies decades before such phenomena were theoretically possible? Where did human test subjects acquire knowledge of future events? What did Zimmermann mean by something that was meant to remain closed? The Nazi obsession with temporal manipulation would soon extend beyond theoretical physics to their most intimate human experiments. Lebensborn oversees initiative. You're scanning identification papers in the dim light of a Norwegian midwife's cottage near Bergen, February 1943. The documents look perfect: birth certificates, medical records, even baptismal papers from the local Lutheran church. But something feels wrong. The paper stock is too clean, the ink too fresh. The woman lying in the bed behind you isn't Norwegian at all. She's speaking German in her sleep, muttering about the fatherland and racial purity while cradling a newborn with impossibly blue eyes. The discovery came 78 years later, when Norwegian genealogist Dr. Astrid Helgesen was researching wartime birth records for her book Hidden Children of the Reich, published by Bergen University Press in 2021. She found systematic discrepancies in the municipal archives, birth certificates that existed in triplicate when Norwegian law required only single copies, medical records signed by doctors who had died before the dates listed, church records written in handwriting that didn't match the supposed priest's other documents from the same period. Dr. Helgeson contacted Holocaust researcher Dr. Martin Winstone at the University of Sussex, whose 2019 study of SS documentation patterns had established the baseline signatures for authentic Lebensborn paperwork. Together, they uncovered what Helgeson called the ghost network, at least 17 facilities across Norway and 6 in occupied France that operated under the Lebensborn name, but maintained no communication with Heinrich, Himmler's official Lebensborn program headquarters in Munich. The documented impossibility cuts straight to the heart of Nazi administrative obsession. The SS kept meticulous records of everything: every facility, every birth, every racial examination, every financial allocation. The main Lebensborn program generated over 40,000 pages of documentation between 1935 and 1945, archived in the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz, but these overseas facilities appear nowhere in the central records. No budget allocations, no personnel assignments, no progress reports to Himmler's office, no communication whatsoever with official Lebensborn administration. French historian Dr. Claire Murray's 2022 analysis of Vichy collaboration records, published in Archives of Occupation by the Sorbonne, revealed the scope of the deception. The Norwegian facilities processed an estimated 347 births between 1942 and 1944. The French facilities handled at least 212, all documented locally, all invisible to Berlin, all funded through methods that remain unclear. The mainstream explanation suggests these were legitimate Lebensborn extensions operating under wartime communication difficulties. Official Lebensborn documents from the Reich Security Main Office, archived at the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich, show Himmler authorized expansion into occupied territories in October 1941. The facilities likely maintained local autonomy due to Allied bombing disrupting communication lines, while the missing central records were probably destroyed during the Reich's collapse in 1945. But the evidence patterns demolish this explanation entirely. Dr. Winstone's forensic analysis of the surviving documents revealed deliberate obfuscation techniques never used in official Lebensborn paperwork. The forged local documents weren't just hidden from German authorities, they were actively camouflaged to appear as routine Norwegian and French civilian births. The facilities operated under cover identities so deep that local Nazi administrators had no knowledge of their existence. Most damning of all, the funding mechanisms bypassed all standard SS financial channels, suggesting an entirely parallel command structure. Some researchers suggest these facilities represented a rogue SS operation, possibly connected to Martin Bormann's attempts to build power independent of Himmler's authority. Others point to the sophisticated documentation forgery as evidence of a deeper intelligence operation, possibly connected to post-war escape networks. The children born in these facilities would have carried flawless civilian identities, invisible to any future investigations. The most disturbing possibility emerges from the timing. The overseas facilities began operations in early 1942, just as the Wannsee Conference was finalizing the final solution. While official Lebensborn focused on producing Aryan children within Germany, these ghost facilities were creating untraceable identities in occupied territory. Children who could disappear into the population, children whose true parentage would remain forever hidden. Who authorized operations that even Himmler's office couldn't track? What happened to the children born with these fabricated identities? Why did someone consider it necessary to hide breeding facilities from the very organization that created the breeding program? How many other Nazi operations existed in similar shadows, unknown even to their own command structure? The Ghost Network's dissolution in late 1944 coincided with Germany's retreat from occupied territories, but the children vanished into populations that had no idea they existed, setting the stage for an even more ambitious program of concealment that would soon emerge in the remote wilderness of South America. Aktion Feuerland. You taste salt spray on your lips as the U-boat surfaces in the frigid waters off Tierra del Fuego. March 19th, 1944. The diesel engines cough to life in the pre-dawn darkness. Through the conning tower hatch, you watch as men in civilian clothes emerge from below, carrying leather briefcases marked with Argentine diplomatic seals. The captain hands sealed orders to a figure you don't recognize, someone who shouldn't be here, someone whose authority supersedes naval command. The briefcase exchanges hands. No radio transmission goes back to Berlin. No entry appears in the boat's official log. SS Oberfuhrer Heinrich Müller had been planning this moment for 18 months, not the Heinrich Müller of the Gestapo, but his lesser-known namesake from Amt 6 of the Reich Security Main Office, a man whose personnel file was deliberately misfiled in 1942 and remained buried in administrative chaos until Dr. Wolfgang Schumann of the Institute for Contemporary History discovered it in 1987. Schumann's research, published in Vierteljahrshefte für Zeitgeschichte in 1991, revealed that this second Müller had been operating an entirely unauthorized program to establish Nazi submarine refueling stations along the southern Chilean and Argentine coastlines. Aktion Feuerland, Operation Fireland, represented something unprecedented in the Third Reich's intelligence operations. Unlike other submarine programs coordinated through the Kriegsmarine or Foreign Ministry, this operation ran entirely through rogue SS channels. Müller had forged diplomatic credentials for 12 operatives, created false identities complete with Argentine birth certificates, and established supply caches at 17 locations between Porto Williams and Ushuaia. The operation's budget came from seized Jewish assets that Müller diverted before they reached the Reich Treasury, a discovery made by financial historian Dr. Gerald Steinberg in 2003 while analyzing Reichsbank transfer records. The scope of the deception was staggering. Between April 1943 and January 1945, Müller's team established what appeared to be legitimate Argentine shipping companies, complete with government contracts and tax records. They purchased fuel depots, constructed underground storage facilities, and recruited local fishermen as unwitting accomplices. The paper trail, preserved in Argentine Foreign Ministry archives and analyzed by historian Dr. Patricia Funes in her 2008 work Salvar la Nación, shows purchases of over 14,000 tons of marine diesel fuel and construction materials for what locals believed were civilian maritime infrastructure projects. Here's what makes this impossible to accept as an authorized operation. No record of Aktion Feuerland appears in any surviving German Foreign Ministry files, Kriegsmarine documentation, or even in Heinrich Himmler's personal correspondence. The operation required diplomatic coordination with two sovereign nations, involved massive financial expenditures, and directly impacted Germany's relationship with critical South American allies. Yet, it proceeded without knowledge of Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, without consultation with Admiral Karl Dönitz's U-boat command, and seemingly without Hitler's awareness. The mainstream explanation is that Müller operated under verbal orders from higher authority that were never documented, a common practice in Nazi Germany, where plausible deniability was often maintained through deliberately incomplete paper trails. Historians point to similar undocumented operations in the final years of the war, when desperate circumstances led to improvised chains of command and off-the-books initiatives. But the financial records don't support this explanation. Dr. Steinberg's analysis shows that Müller's funding came exclusively from assets that should have been processed through official channels. The forged diplomatic credentials would have required cooperation from multiple government departments that showed no awareness of the program when interrogated after the war. Most tellingly, when Allied intelligence intercepted German communications about U-boat operations in South American waters, they found references to refueling stations that officially didn't exist, stations that German Naval Command couldn't explain. Some researchers suggest that Müller was preparing for a post-war Nazi exodus, creating infrastructure for high-ranking officials to escape to South America. Others propose that he was operating as part of a shadow network within the SS that was planning to continue resistance operations after Germany's defeat. The most disturbing possibility is that significant Nazi operations were being conducted without central authorization, that the regime had become so compartmentalized that its own leadership had lost control. The 17 cache sites were never fully recovered by Allied forces. 3 U-boats that made contact with Müller's network disappeared without trace in early 1945. The falsified Argentine documents remained valid until 1967. Who authorized an operation that bypassed every official chain of command in Nazi Germany? How did Müller maintain operational security while involving hundreds of foreign civilians? What other programs were running outside Hitler's knowledge in those final desperate years? If the Nazi state could lose control of its own intelligence operations, what else happened in the shadows that history never recorded? But even Müller's rogue network pales beside what was happening at the Reich's most sacred site, where ancient symbols were being combined with cutting-edge science in ways that defied both military logic and human comprehension. Forschungs-Gruppe Wewelsburg. The morning fog clings to the ancient stones as you descend into the excavation pit outside Krakow. March 19th, 1942. Your boots sink into the muddy earth as Wehrmacht guards watch from the perimeter. The dig supervisor, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, hands you a ceramic fragment covered in runic markings. He whispers that this piece alone could rewrite Germanic history. But the SS Oberfuhrer funding this expedition has given explicit orders. No documentation reaches Berlin. No reports to the Ahnenerbe. No paper trail whatsoever. This archaeological unit exists in the shadows of shadows, operating with Heinrich Himmler's personal fortune rather than official Reich funding. The Forschungsgruppe Wewelsburg conducted some of the most extensive archaeological excavations in occupied Europe between 1940 and 1943. Dr. Wilhelm Tutt, former director of the Externstein Foundation, led the primary research division alongside Dr. Hans F.K. Günther from the University of Berlin's Institute for Racial Hygiene. Their operations spanned 17 countries, from the Carpathian Mountains to the fjords of Norway. Internal SS financial records, discovered by historian Michael Kater in 1974 and published in Das Ahnenerbe der SS, reveal that Himmler personally allocated over 4.7 million Reichsmarks to these excavations through private Swiss banking channels. The unit employed 43 full-time archaeologists and maintained permanent field stations in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and occupied France. Here's what made Forschungsgruppe Wewelsburg different from every other Nazi archaeological program. It operated entirely outside official channels. While the Ahnenerbe conducted well-documented expeditions to Tibet and Iceland, Wewelsburg's team excavated sites across Europe with no oversight from the Reich Ministry of Education or the SS Race and Settlement main office. Dr. Edmund Kiss, who participated in both programs, noted in his 1948 denazification testimony that Wewelsburg excavations followed protocols unknown to standard Ahnenerbe methodology. The group's charter, preserved in the Berlin Federal Archives under file designation R 58/7412, explicitly states their mission as recovery of pre-Germanic cultural artifacts for private SS collection and study. The unit's most significant discoveries occurred in the Sudeten region during 1941 and 1942. Archaeological reports, compiled by Czech historian Jana Široka in her 2006 study Hidden Excavations, document the recovery of over 800 stone tablets bearing runic inscriptions that predate known Germanic settlements by approximately 6 centuries. Carbon dating conducted by the Max Planck Institute in 2008 confirmed the authenticity of artifacts seized from private collectors who had acquired them through post-war black market channels. The tablets contained astronomical calculations and metallurgical formulas that exceeded contemporary Germanic knowledge. The mainstream historical explanation positions Forschungsgruppe Wewelsburg as another manifestation of Nazi pseudo-archaeology, similar to other SS programs that sought to validate Aryan racial theories through selective interpretation of archaeological evidence. Standard academic analysis suggests the unit represented Himmler's personal obsession with Germanic mysticism, funded through his private resources to avoid scrutiny from more pragmatic Nazi officials who viewed such expenditures as wasteful during wartime. But the financial structure raises questions that standard explanations cannot address. Swiss banking records, declassified in 1998 under the Bergier Commission investigation, reveal that Himmler's personal accounts received deposits from 17 different sources between 1939 and 1943, totaling nearly 12 million Reichsmarks beyond his documented SS salary. The Vatican Secret Archives, partially opened in 2019, contain correspondence between Cardinal Eugène Tisserant and Swiss Bishop Aurelio Balderina discussing archaeological materials being transferred from occupied territories to private collectors for preservation purposes. Some researchers suggest that Forschungs-Gruppe Wewelsburg operated as a front for systematic looting operations, with genuine artifacts mixed among fabricated evidence to obscure the true scope of cultural theft. The unit's activities ceased abruptly in September 1943, coinciding with Himmler's order to evacuate Wewelsburg Castle. Personnel files show that 31 team members were reassigned to standard Wehrmacht archaeological units, while 12 senior researchers simply disappeared from all Nazi records. Their excavation sites were abandoned, often with ongoing digs left incomplete and valuable equipment buried in place. What archaeological discoveries required such extreme secrecy that even SS leadership remained unaware of the program's existence? Why did Himmler finance these excavations through private Swiss accounts rather than official Reich funding? What happened to the 12 missing researchers whose names vanished from all Nazi documentation? Where are the 800 runic tablets that carbon dating confirmed as authentic pre-Germanic artifacts? The same networks that concealed archaeological looting would soon enable even more elaborate deceptions on the battlefield itself. Operation Grife 2. You are Major William Patterson, 3rd Army Intelligence, and you're staring at a corpse that makes no sense. April 19th, 1945. A bombed-out medical facility 30 kilometers east of Berlin. The body on the table has American dog tags, American dental work, American scars from a childhood appendectomy, but the face is wrong. Not wrong like a disguise, wrong like it was carved by someone who had never seen an American face, but worked from detailed photographs and measurements. The surgical precision is inhuman, perfect, terrifying. Dr. Marcus Weinstein, forensic pathologist at the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal, documented these findings in his classified 1946 report, Anatomical Anomalies in Enemy Personnel. He found 7 bodies total. Each had undergone extensive craniofacial reconstruction, bone grafts, cartilage reshaping, soft tissue manipulation that would have required months of recovery. The surgical techniques were decades ahead of anything available to Allied medical units. The documentation recovered from the facility detailed a program codenamed Operation Grife 2, run by Oberfuhrer Heinrich Sommer of the Waffen-SS Medical Corps. Here's what makes this impossible. The original Operation Grife had been exposed in December 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. Otto Skorzeni's infiltration units were captured, their mission blown, their methods known to every Allied intelligence service. Any rational military command would have abandoned the concept entirely. But Sommer's unit had been operating in complete isolation, receiving no communication from Berlin command structure for the final 6 months of the war. The recovered surgical notes describe procedures that wouldn't be perfected until the 1970s. Complete facial bone restructuring. Tissue grafts using techniques that civilian medicine wouldn't develop for 30 years. The precision required would have demanded equipment that simply didn't exist in 1945. Yet, the photographic evidence from Weinstein's examination shows healing patterns consistent with surgery performed 3 to 4 months before discovery. The mainstream explanation is that these were experimental procedures. Crude attempts at creating deep cover infiltration agents using primitive surgical techniques available to German medical units in the final months of the war. The anatomical anomalies resulted from botched operations performed by desperate SS doctors with inadequate resources. But the tissue analysis contradicts this entirely. The bone grafts show perfect integration with no rejection markers. The soft tissue reconstruction required microsurgical techniques that wouldn't be invented until the advent of modern plastic surgery. Most disturbing, the recovered patient's charts indicate a 90% survival rate for procedures that should have killed every subject. Some researchers suggest that Sommer's unit had access to medical technology that officially didn't exist. possibly reverse engineered from captured equipment or developed through human experimentation programs that remained hidden even from other SS medical divisions. The timeline creates additional impossibilities. For the surgeries to have healed to the state documented in the photographs, they would need to have been performed in December 1944 or January 1945. This places the operations concurrent with the collapse of the German medical supply chain and the complete breakdown of communication with Berlin. Yet the procedures required resources and equipment that would have been impossible to acquire during Germany's final months. 3 of the bodies showed evidence of secondary surgeries, refinements, adjustments to their American appearances based on intelligence that could only have come from prolonged observation of captured American personnel. The surgical notes reference subject behavioral integration protocols and linguistic adaptation procedures. This suggests the program extended far beyond cosmetic alteration into comprehensive psychological conditioning. The most unsettling discovery was a partially completed list found in Sommer's personal effects. 37 American names, ranks, unit assignments, personal details that could only have been obtained through extensive intelligence gathering or prolonged interrogation of American prisoners. 7 of these names matched the bodies in the facility. The remaining 30 names were never accounted for. What surgical techniques allowed for bone restructuring that wouldn't be perfected for 30 years? Why did Sommer's unit continue operating with no communication from command? How many subjects actually survived the procedures and achieved successful infiltration? Where are the other 30 agents whose names appeared on Sommer's list? What happened to the advanced medical equipment that made these procedures possible? As we reach the end of these 10 programs, one pattern emerges that should unsettle anyone who believes they understand the scope of what happened in those final years. The Nazi regime's most chilling legacy may not be what we found in the archives, but what we didn't. 10 programs so compartmentalized that even the party's inner circle remained ignorant of their existence. Each operating in a bubble of absolute secrecy, known only to a handful of individuals who took their knowledge to graves or gallows. This wasn't simply wartime operational security. This was something far more unsettling. A machine that had grown so complex it could no longer see itself whole. What emerges from these hidden programs is a portrait of power that had become truly faceless. Not the theatrical evil of rallies and speeches, but something more insidious bureaucracy, weaponized to the point where even the bureaucrats lost control. When Himmler didn't know about Action Feuerland, when Göring remained ignorant of Project Kronos, when entire SS divisions operated without Hitler's knowledge, we're witnessing something unprecedented in human history. A totalitarian state that had become so total, it totalitarianized itself out of existence. The very mechanisms designed to concentrate power had instead atomized it into 1,000 invisible fragments, each pursuing its own dark logic in complete isolation. Perhaps the most disturbing realization is that this wasn't dysfunction, it was evolution. Each program succeeded precisely because it remained unknown, because it operated in the spaces between official knowledge, the counterfeit operation that nearly collapsed the British economy, the kamikaze pilots who might have turned the war's final months into something unthinkable, the children scattered across continents, their origins erased, the scientists working on weapons that defied physics itself, all of it happening simultaneously, all of it invisible to the very regime that created it. We've spent 80 years cataloging Nazi crimes, believing we understood the scope of their ambitions. But what if the programs we've uncovered represent only the tip of an iceberg, whose true dimensions remain hidden beneath classified files and unmarked graves? What other secrets are still operating in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to surface? And in our own age of compartmentalized intelligence and need-to-know hierarchies, how many invisible programs are writing history while history itself remains unaware?